A winter night in Pine Ridge, Illinois. A dark figure stood outside a small police substation in the heart of Pine Ridge. The bitter wind swept through the empty street as the clock struck 11 p.m. The faint light from the station was the only thing cutting through the darkness. Inside, Officer Jack Thompson, who was on duty, glanced out the window. He couldn't help but notice the young man who had been lingering outside for over 30 minutes. "He's been standing there for a while now," Jack muttered, concerned. Jack stood up from his desk. The temperature outside had dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, too cold for anyone to be wandering around in a thin jacket. He couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling settling in his chest. When he opened the door, a blast of cold air rushed into the station. Jack quickly waved for the young man to come inside. "Hey, get in here. It's freezing out there." The young man hesitated for a moment before stepping into the station. His face was flushed from the cold, and his hands trembled slightly. "Come in and warm up. Want a cup of coffee?" Jack offered, motioning toward a chair. He immediately prepared a hot cup of coffee for the young man. The young man's face, still red from the cold, gradually relaxed as the warmth of the station surrounded him. His jacket was clearly too worn and thin to offer any real protection against the harsh winter. "So, what's going on?" "It's late," Jack asked, his voice calm and reassuring. The young man hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. His hands still shook slightly as he accepted the cup. I came here to look for a job," he finally said, his voice weak. He looked as though he hadn't eaten a decent meal in days. Jack didn't press him. He simply waited for him to continue, giving him space. The ticking of the clock filled the silence for a moment, along with the occasional sound of the wind rattling the window. The young man took a sip of the coffee and exhaled deeply before speaking again. "Things didn't go well." Jack listened attentively. The despair in the man's voice was unmistakable. I've been trying to find a job," the young man continued. "But they turned me away after a medical checkup. Said my blood pressure was too high. They didn't want to take the risk." Jack nodded, his expression growing more serious. He could sense that the young man's situation wasn't a simple one. "Have you eaten?" Jack asked gently. The young man shook his head slightly. "The only thing I had today was a piece of bread this morning." Jack opened a desk drawer and pulled out his packed lunch. "Here, take this. Eat first. We'll talk after." At first, the young man hesitated, but Jack's sincere offer convinced him. He took the food and began eating slowly. As he did, the atmosphere in the station became noticeably warmer and more comfortable. After a few minutes, the young man finally started opening up about his life. "I grew up in the foster system. Never knew my parents," he began. "The only memories I have are of the group home and the friends I made there." Jack listened silently, nodding to encourage him to continue. He handed him another cup of coffee, giving him time to collect himself. "The group home wasn't all bad," the young man said. "The staff took care of me, and I got along with most of the kids." But his face darkened as he recalled a more painful memory. "I wanted to go to high school, but that wasn't really an option. Money was tight, and I had to earn a living." Jack's eyes softened. It was hard to imagine a teenager having to navigate life alone without a support system. "I started working odd jobs when I was 16. Dishwashing, construction work, handing out flyers, anything I could find. But nothing stuck." The young man paused and let out a long sigh. His shoulders seemed weighed down by invisible burdens. Despite being only 23, his eyes carried the exhaustion of someone far older. "I thought I'd have better luck here in Pine Ridge," he said. "Things weren't working out in Chicago anymore. I figured a smaller town might offer more opportunities." But his voice faded, and his hands trembled again. This time it wasn't from the cold. "I failed again today," he said quietly. "They wouldn't hire me because of my health. And now, I can't even afford my medication." Jack leaned forward, his face filled with concern. He could tell the man's situation was desperate. "Do you have any family or friends you can call for help?" Jack asked. The young man shook his head. "I've been moving from place to place for so long that I've lost touch with most people. Everyone's busy trying to survive. I can't blame them for not staying in touch." His voice was tinged with loneliness. Outside, the snow began falling steadily, tapping softly against the windows. Jack watched the falling snow for a moment, deep in thought. He made up his mind. "Wait here," Jack said, standing up. The young man looked up, confused but hopeful. Jack returned a moment later with a small envelope. "This is from me, personally," Jack said, handing him the envelope. "It should be enough for a bus ticket back to Chicago. When you're back on your feet, pay it forward. Help someone else in need." Tears welled up in the young man's eyes. I don't know how to thank you." Jack smiled warmly. "You don't have to. Just promise me you'll make it through this and help someone else one day." Jack drove the young man to the bus station. Snow continued to fall heavily, blanketing the streets in white. Inside the patrol car, the young man gazed out the window, lost in thought. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll never forget this." "You'll be fine," Jack replied confidently. "Just keep moving forward." At the station, Jack waited with him until the bus arrived. As the doors opened, the young man turned to Jack one last time. "I'll make something of myself," he said, his voice trembling. "And I'll help others, just like you helped me." Jack gave him a firm handshake. "I know you will." 10 years passed. The young man, now a successful entrepreneur in Chicago, never forgot Jack Thompson and the kindness that had saved him. One day, he decided it was time to return to Pine Ridge. As he walked into the familiar police station, his heart raced. It had been 10 years since that freezing night in Pine Ridge. The young man, Ethan Miller, was no longer the struggling, lost soul he once was. He had worked relentlessly over the past decade, transforming his life from the ground up. His small online business had grown into a successful enterprise, with annual revenues in the millions. But despite his achievements, Ethan never forgot Officer Jack Thompson and the night that changed his life forever. On a snowy afternoon, much like the one from years ago, Ethan decided it was time to go back to Pine Ridge and express his gratitude. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the familiar police station, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he opened the door, the smell of old wood and coffee greeted him, a scent that brought back a flood of memories. A young officer at the front desk glanced up. "Hi there, can I help you?" "I'm looking for Officer Jack Thompson," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The officer smiled. "You're in luck. Captain Thompson is here today. Just give me a second." A few moments later, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Jack Thompson, now wearing the insignia of a captain, looked just as Ethan remembered him, though with a few more gray hairs. Jack paused for a moment, his eyes widening in recognition. "Ethan? It's me," Ethan said with a smile. "It's been a long time." The two men shook hands, the warmth of the gesture speaking louder than any words. For a moment, they stood there in silence, both recalling that cold night from years ago. "Are you free for lunch?" Ethan asked. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you for a long time." Jack nodded. "Absolutely. There's a diner just down the street that makes a great bowl of chili. Let's go." The diner hadn't changed much over the years. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air as the two men sat in a booth by the window. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the streets in white. Ethan leaned back in his seat, a smile playing on his lips. 10 years ago, I walked into your station with nothing but the clothes on my back and no idea what to do next. That night, you changed my life." Jack listened quietly as Ethan recounted his journey, how he had started working nights at a convenience store, taking online courses during the day, and eventually building his business from scratch. "There were so many times I wanted to give up," Ethan admitted. "But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered what you did for me. I couldn't let your kindness go to waste." Jack smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "You did all the hard work," he said. "I just gave you a little push." Ethan shook his head. "No, it was more than that. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That gave me the strength to keep going." He paused, his voice softening. "Since then, I've tried to pay it forward. I've been mentoring young entrepreneurs and supporting foster programs. I wanted to be the person you were for me, the one who shows up when someone needs it most. Jack's eyes grew misty. You've made me proud, Ethan. More than you'll ever know. The two men sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of their shared history settle around them. From that day on, Ethan and Jack stayed in touch regularly. Their bond deepened into a lasting friendship, built on mutual respect and gratitude. Ethan's business continued to grow, but he never let success change the values that Jack had helped instill in him. He remained humble, always looking for ways to give back. Jack, now a respected captain, often shared Ethan's story with new recruits at the police academy. Remember, he would tell them, even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life. You might not see it right away, but trust me, it matters. One day, Ethan invited Jack to speak at a youth mentorship conference he was hosting in Chicago. The audience was filled with young people, many of whom were facing the same struggles Ethan once had. Today, I want to introduce you to the man who helped me turn my life around, Ethan said from the stage. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here. Jack stepped up to the podium, his voice steady and warm. I didn't do anything special, he began. I just did what anyone should do, help someone who needed it. But watching Ethan's journey has taught me something important. When you offer kindness, it multiplies. It creates ripples that reach far beyond what you ever imagined. The audience erupted in applause. Ethan smiled from his seat, knowing that everything had come full circle. Over the years, Ethan and Jack continued their work, one as a successful mentor and entrepreneur, the other as a dedicated police captain. Together, they became symbols of hope and resilience in their community. And through it all, they never forgot the lesson that had brought them together. Kindness changes lives. It always does. After their reunion, Ethan became even more devoted to his mission of paying it forward. He founded the Ethan Miller Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting foster youth and struggling entrepreneurs. He frequently visited high schools, youth centers, and shelters, sharing his personal story. I know what it feels like to be lost, Ethan would tell his audience. But the smallest act of kindness can change everything. It did for me, and it can for you too. He set up scholarship programs, funded startup grants for young entrepreneurs, and established a mentorship network that connected struggling youths with business leaders. Ethan believed in giving others the same chance he had received that cold night in Pine Ridge. Every month, he made a personal visit to a nearby foster home, bringing gifts, food, and something even more valuable, his time. He always made sure to sit down with the kids, listening to their stories and encouraging them to dream bigger. One day, as he was leaving the home, a young boy tugged on his jacket. "Mr. Miller, do you really think someone like me can succeed?" the boy asked, his eyes filled with uncertainty. Ethan crouched down and looked him in the eye. "Absolutely. If I can do it, so can you. You're stronger than you know." The boy smiled, holding on to Ethan's words as if they were a lifeline. A few months later, Ethan received a surprising phone call. "Mr. Miller, we're hosting the annual Illinois Community Leadership Awards, and we'd like to recognize you for your contributions to youth mentorship and business development." Ethan was humbled. He accepted the invitation, but there was only one person he wanted to share this moment with, Jack Thompson. He immediately picked up his phone. "Jack, what are you doing next Saturday?" "Depends. Are you getting me out of a boring city council meeting?" Jack joked. Ethan chuckled. "Even better. I want you to be my guest at the State Leadership Awards." Jack paused for a moment, his voice turning serious. "Ethan, I'd be honored." The event was held in a grand hall in downtown Chicago, filled with community leaders, business pioneers, and government officials. Ethan stood backstage, adjusting his tie and trying to calm his nerves. Jack, standing beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Relax. You've earned this." When Ethan's name was announced, the crowd rose to its feet in applause. He walked onto the stage, the bright lights blinding him momentarily. Standing at the podium, he scanned the audience until his eyes found Jack, sitting in the front row with a proud smile on his face. 10 years ago, Ethan began, I was lost. I had no home, no job, and no hope. I was standing on the edge, ready to give up. But then one person noticed me. He didn't judge me. He didn't ask for anything in return. He just helped me. Ethan paused, his voice thick with emotion. That man is Officer Jack Thompson. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today. He didn't just help me survive. He inspired me to become the person I am now. The audience erupted into another round of applause as Ethan lifted the award high. Tears welled up in Jack's eyes as he stood and clapped, overwhelmed with pride and gratitude. After the ceremony, Ethan and Jack sat at a quiet table, sipping their drinks and reflecting on the moment. That was some speech, Jack said, shaking his head with a smile. You didn't have to say all that. I meant every word, Ethan replied. You changed my life, Jack. I want people to know that one act of kindness can ripple out in ways we can't imagine. Jack raised his glass. To kindness, he said. May it never stop spreading. They clinked glasses, the sound of their toast a quiet reminder of everything they had overcome together. Over the following years, Ethan expanded his foundation even further. He partnered with universities, launched job training programs, and helped hundreds of young people start their own businesses. His foundation became a beacon of hope for those who needed a second chance. Jack, now retired from active duty, joined Ethan's foundation as an advisor, dedicating his time to mentoring young people. Together, they created a network of mentors who had all experienced hardship and found a way through it. One of their most ambitious projects was the Second Chance Incubator, a startup accelerator for individuals with difficult pasts, whether they had grown up in foster care, experienced homelessness, or simply hit rock bottom. The program provided funding, mentorship, and the tools they needed to succeed. Ethan personally mentored many of the participants. One evening, during a feedback session, a young woman stood up and said, I just want to thank you for believing in us. Most people see where we've been. You see where we're going. Ethan smiled. That's because I know what it feels like to be where you are, and I know you'll get through it. Years later, the story of Ethan and Jack became the subject of articles, interviews, and even a local documentary. The world was inspired by how one simple act of kindness had rippled out to touch the lives of so many others. But for Ethan and Jack, it wasn't about the recognition. It was about the people they could help. We didn't set out to change the world, Jack would say. We just wanted to do the right thing. Turns out, that's sometimes enough.